Hey guys, what is happening? And welcome to another episode of Anime Metal Viking with me, your host Viking, and today I'll be reviewing the recent self-titled Suicide Silence album that was released at the end of February this year. Oh man, was this album a huge and total disappointment. Add on the band's inability to handle criticism and it only makes it worse. Now, without further delay, let's do this. Now, I'm not gonna lie, most of the riffs on this album are totally uninspired, generic, and mostly sound almost identical to every Korn riff and various other nu metal bands of the past. There are some good ones though. The intro riff for Silence and the majority of the riffs in Listen and Hold Me Up, Hold Me Down are really good and quite catchy, but sadly most of them are really uninspired, which is really sad. On the plus side, the drumming is pretty solid on this album for the nu metal style they've adapted at least. It may not be what we're used to hearing from Suicide Silence's drummer, but it's definitely not bad. There were some songs that hinted at deathcore elements in the bridging or interlude riffs. Some of the more ambient guitar elements weren't that bad either, and the guitar solo on the Zero was actually pretty awesome. Unfortunately, it's not enough to redeem this album of its bad qualities. The clean vocals are a huge disappointment on this album. When the band announced that they were going to have clean vocals, I was expecting something similar to what Whitechapel have been doing and use deeper clean vocals than that of the usual post-hardcore styled clean vocals that deathcore bands like Betraying the Martyrs and In Dying Arms use. Instead, Eddie tries to imitate Chino Marino of Deftones and Jonathan Davis of Korn, and both these bands are unique in style and no one can imitate their sound, but unfortunately Suicide Silence really tried to capture the essence of the bands I just mentioned and they failed miserably. I also thought Eddie's harsh vocals were terrible on this album. We know he can do better, as his vocals in All Shall Perish and on the band's 2014 album You Can't Stop Me were stellar. But, like I mentioned in my review of Doris, his hardcore punk-styled whiny screams are just plain awful, and I personally couldn't tolerate them. However, in Hold Me Up, Hold Me Down, he tries to do some slam metal guttural vocals in between certain verses, and they were decent, but not great. Otherwise, come on Eddie, we know you can do better. Also, one or two choruses on certain songs aren't as terrible as the majority of the tracks. However, the only chorus I could say I enjoyed on this album is the chorus for Run. It was the only one that didn't sound like a Korn-styled chorus. It was still a nu metal-styled chorus, but it was the only one that stood out in a good way for me. Not to say it's original or something, but it was still enjoyable to a point. Another thing is that the song titles for most of these songs are just plain silly. As if Doris wasn't a silly enough name for a metal song, then titles like Don't Be Careful, You Might Get Hurt sound sillier and are just plain stupid. No offense to the band, but unless you're a parody metal band, I suggest you guys rethink what your song titles are. Not to mention the lyrics of these songs fall completely flat in comparison to their past works, which even I can admit as a fan is not great lyricism either. The production value on this album isn't exactly great. I mean, I don't mind raw produced metal, but in the case of this album, it was totally unnecessary. There's nothing wrong with producing high quality nu metal music. Not every nu metal record has to be produced in the same way as the stuff from the late 90s. If this album was released in the days of nu metal, it might have been more of a hit success. But since they released this album after Korn released The Serenity of Suffering, which is probably their best album since their early days and better produced, of course people aren't going to enjoy it. Fans don't want a Korn imitation. If they took Korn's sound and added something new to it, and Eddie wasn't trying to imitate Jonathan Davis so much, then maybe it might have been better. But I'd rather listen to Korn than a Korn imitator, and that's exactly what this album is. This album was not an expansion of deathcore, despite Eddie's strongly adamant stance that it is. It was nothing more than a reversion to nu metal. If Eddie and the band really want to expand the deathcore sound, then they should consider the following. 1. Collaborate with non-deathcore slam vocalists. One of the major problems with deathcore is the fact that bands within the genre generally only collaborate with other deathcore vocalists and slam metal vocalists. Mitch may have had Jonathan Davis on the Black Crown, and Eddie may have had George Fisher and Max Cavalera on the previous record, but regarding the other bands in the genre, we have yet to see something close to that. So start collaborating with vocalists from either more traditional styles of metal or some of the more recent to fairly recent styles of metal. When it comes to clean vocals in deathcore, I don't mind them. However, as much as I love In Dying Arms and Betraying the Martyrs, I don't agree that post-hardcore styled clean vocals suit the genre. If deathcore is to have clean vocals, I personally think the clean vocals that we hear in genres like industrial metal, symphonic metal, or melodic death metal suits the genre better. Vocalists I'd like to hear in deathcore songs include Bjorn Strutt of Soilwork, Christian Alvestam of X, Scar Symmetry, currently Solution 0.45, Alyssa White-Bliss of Arch Enemy, Devin Townsend of Devin Townsend Project, Charlotte Vessels of Delane, and Burton C. Bell of Fear Factory. Number 2, instrumentals. Instrumentally, deathcore can be expanded by making the songwriting more progressive, adding guitar solos over the breakdowns instead of just having a plain breakdown followed by a solo or no solo at all, adding keyboard synths, adding riffs from other styles of death metal other than straight up death metal, having ambient elements like background choir vocals, tribal vocals, or orchestral elements, maybe adding industrial metal riffs to certain parts of the song, duetting with vocalists in some choruses or chorus build-ups, or even adding rap elements where it's appropriate at least. All this can be done without sacrificing the more traditional and staple elements of deathcore. This is why this album fails, as it ignores these possibilities and tries to revive a style of metal that has no more room for experimentation. Number 3, lyricism. Deathcore is one of those subgenres of metal where the lyrics can be hit or miss. It all depends on the band, their influences, and the message that they are trying to get across to their fans and music listeners in general. Suicide Silence, even with Mitch at the helm, might have some songs with great lyrics, but the majority of the time the lyrics are kinda edgy and sometimes have no clear message and make little to no sense at all. The lyrics on this album, however, are just silly, and they make even the silliest lyrics on the band's past works seem like quotes from Aristotle, which is saying something. The band should take a look at what other bands from other styles of metal have done with their lyrics, or even draw from places such as literature and philosophy for lyrical influence. Ugh. I would have to rate this album a disappointing 2.5 out of 10. While there were some elements on the album that had potential instrumentally, it sadly wasn't enough to make up for all the other terrible elements of this album. Add in my personal enjoyment of the album, of which there was little to none, and the fact that I struggled to listen to the whole thing only makes things worse. I recommend streaming this album before deciding whether or not you want to purchase it. Sorry, Eddie, but if you really want to do this kind of music, then call Suicide Silence quits and start a new project with the same members if you feel that deathcore is no longer your thing. Similar artists would include Korn and Deftones, and I would recommend that you check these artists out over this album, as these bands are the original masters of any of the sounds and techniques that Suicide Silence tried to imitate on this album, and their material is way better despite what many people say about nu metal these days. The album was released on 27 February 2017 and is available via Nuclear Blast Records for streaming and purchasing on almost every major music website and at your local record store. And that concludes this review for today. What are your thoughts on this album? Do you enjoy this nu metal sound by Suicide Silence, or are you like me and the rest of the fan base and found it to be a huge disappointment? Let me know in the comments below. Also, do not attack each other in the comments over this, as I realize this is quite a controversial subject in the deathcore community, and I believe in constructive criticism, freedom of speech, and open discussion. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed this review, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and share this video with your friends. And finally guys, don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and DeviantArt for more awesome news and updates regarding the channel and the entertainment industry in general. I am Viking. And until next time guys, have a kick-ass day.